Welcome, everyone. It's good to see you all again. Today is our second official lesson of the current 12-week series. And today, actually, we like to start off our sessions with a quote, but today I'm going to ask y'all one big burning question to start us off. And it is, why poetry? ¿Por qué la poesía? ¿Qué tiene de ver la poesía con nosotros? What is the purpose of poetry for us as writers? I mean, all of you are here specifically for that. At least I hope you're here specifically for that. But why poetry? What is so special about it? Ms. Lois?
First of all, it's a written way of communication, but it's unique. We can all be, rhyming. What is that word they use?
Rhythm.
Rhythmic, yeah. Or we can put some prose in there, so we can design it ourselves.
Yeah.
So, it's all about us, It's like I said in my workshop, it's poems are rap is poems set to music. And so we create it, and it's from us. I mean, It depends on who you are, but it's the image of who you are in ink.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah. No, yeah. And that's definitely one way to think about it, right? It's an image of you in ink form. I like that. Dr. Rosie, I see you raised your hand.
Yes, I feel that with poetry, it just has a real nice rhythmic way of expressing themselves, and yet many people can relate to those because we're all very expressive, and it doesn't matter what language you speak. So poetry brings in that real nice dance move rhythmically, but through words.
Okay, I like that. Yeah. I've heard the word rhythm a couple of times now, so there's something to that. Abraham?
Well, I think I always had a lot of problems with rules and regular writing essays and all that. They have their way, but poetry has this freedom that's unique to itself. And I think because it also precedes regular writing, I think. And it gives you more freedom to express and to leave that expression on the paper other than just regular writing.
I like your observation. It does precede regular writing to a certain degree, I like that. You rule breaker, you. Jessica? You're on mute if you're not aware. I guess we'll come back to Jessica. Anyone else have any responses to the question, why poetry? There we go. Jess?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Oh, okay. I was, that's a really good question, number one, because I've never thought about it. So this is on the fly, but really what stands out to me is what Abraham, I feel like with poetry, I can relate my life or, write about my life or my life experiences through poetry more because there aren't as many rules. I tend to have broken some rules, or not even rules, but maybe formalities or traditions. I like poetry too because you can write something really great and leave off without an ending, and there's it's so open to interpretation. I think that it gives you the liberty to write things, and it's interesting how people, which I guess traditional writing can do that too, but I definitely think what I like about poetry is that I feel like its rules resemble my life. Like there's so many which ways that can go, and yeah, that's what I feel. I didn't articulate that very well, but I hope you understand. And that's a good question. Thanks for asking it.
Yeah. No, and I like that observation. I think that it's interesting to hear you say that poetry reflects your life in a way, which is kind of cool. The rules of poetry reflect life. Feels like as a broader statement. I see Rebecca or Roots.
Yes, buenas noches, everyone. Yeah, to answer the question, why poetry? I feel like I'm a very emotional person. Like, I'm just like very in tune with emotions, and it can be very hard to express myself in a way where it's like okay for others, because I mean, sometimes like when you cry or whatever in front of other people, like they don't understand, that it's just like a way, a release, right? And I feel that poetry is a release like that. And it's a way that everybody can um, relate because we each have these emotions, right? And it's a way that we could freely express our emotions, like Abraham said, on paper. And because everybody's sort of lived through similar situations, we can deeply like feel it. You know what I'm saying? And we're where we're allowed to be like overly, like dramatic or just write out whatever we feel, like just be free. So I think that's my answer to why poetry.
Nice. Yeah, I've heard a couple of recurring themes here. Freedom I think is one of them, um, along with rhythm. For me, poetry, I think that, it does go towards, something a little bit deeper, something that is open to interpretation. And I think the first time that I ever saw or read any kind of insight into why poetry, it came from this particular poet, William Carlos Williams. And so a little bit about William Carlos Williams and specifically this quote. It comes from his book, specifically Asphodel, that greeny flower and other love poems. William Carlos Williams, this is important to know. He was born on the 17th of September in the year 1883 and passed away the 4th of March 1963. He was an American poet. Specifically, he was born in Puerto Rico, and he wrote, but more importantly or more interestingly, is that he was also a physician. He was actually a doctor, a medical doctor, who worked in rural New England. And he is very closely associated with modernism and imagism, which are two particular movements in poetry, specifically in literature, that we still feel today. But what he wrote that really stood out to me, that really changed my personal perception of poetry, was this. He said, or he wrote, "It is difficult to get the news from poems, yet men die miserably every day for lack of what is found there." Y aquí se los traducí para ustedes que lo prefieren en español. Es difícil recibir noticias a través de poemas. Aún hombres mueren miserablemente cada día por falta de lo que se encuentra allí. This right here, I remember, I actually read this on the wall of an art museum, of a gallery. And when I read that, it just, as a young poet, when I was like, I think 20, 21, when I first came across that quote, it really gave me a new sense of purpose for poetry. It made me understand that poetry can be so much more than just, rhyming and, the musicality of it. There's so much more to poetry than even sometimes we can understand. I heard a hand raise. Let me see, who was that? I think, see, Jessica first. Or Miss Luz?
The old one.
Oh, okay. Miss Luz?
Yes, initially I couldn't put my finger on it, but when you shared what you just read us and your experience, I recall now my interest with I was reading long ago I read the books of Carlos Castaneda, the books of Journey to Ixtlan, and I guess anthropology, sorcery. It's very mystical reading, very insightful. And Don Juan was teaching Carlos, he was a Yaqui Indian, and he was talking about poetry and told Carlos to read poetry and that very often the gist of the poem was going to be in the first sentence. And that intrigued me because I really hadn't read hardly any poetry. And then I started to read poetry, and I would look for the first sentence and try and find what the direction of the poem is or what the message was. So I think that was initially what turned me on to poetry.
Interesting. The search. That's what I'm hearing. It was about the search, right? Yeah.
Yes, definitely.
Cool. Elena, I see you raised your hand.
Yeah, so my question is, how long have you wrote poetry for? For like 8 years, 9 years, 10 years, or 11 years?
A lot longer than that. I've been writing poetry since I was in high school.
And then my question is, do you go to the library to check out poetry books?
I have in the past. Yeah.
And then one more thing. So how long did you become a poetry, and why you chose that book?
Well, if I understand your question, I became a poet the day that I started writing poetry. And I've been crafting my own books now for at least 10 years, if not longer now. But
Okay, so the last time I didn't make it for poetry. So my question is, do you think I was here for poetry or no?
why you're here for poetry?
Yeah.
Well, I think you are. So let's
Okay.
yeah.
Because
So
the last time I wasn't here because I was on vacation this whole time.
right. Yeah. Well, let's continue on, Elena. And I know that Abraham had his hand raised as well, so let's give him a chance to
Okay.
ask his question or make his comment.
Well, to me, it kind of reflects like the levels of poetry that it has. For example, you see a paper that says selling washer $700, right? It's a straightforward. You can understand it. Poetry has a different way of approach. It has either rhythm, style, and sometimes hidden words. That's like different levels in which you can get something different, and also different mind state you're approaching the poetry. Like somebody here was saying, like it speaks to me because probably one line out of the entire poem will speak to you, and all of a sudden you find something new, right? This is not like other things that you can just read and you understand everything. Poetry has a different approach. You have to kind of dig in, or just by coincidence speaks to you specifically, because by coincidence or miracle, whatever you call it, you are the person reading it and it's exactly meant for you.
Yeah. There's a certain level of like, you're meant to get whatever it is that you get out of the poem. It could be kind of like a fate, a way of thinking about fate, but it can also be, more, which we'll definitely get into. Last comment, I think, and then we'll move on to some building blocks. Miss Lois?
Oh, you can move on. Abraham asked questions and made the statements I wanted.
Oh, okay. Great minds think alike then.
Hey.
All right. So before we kind of get into the next phase of this discussion, I want to make sure that everybody just kind of generally understands some of the basic building blocks of poetry, right? La materia prima de poesía. And there's definitely a distinction to be made between prose. Most people, I think, can understand prose in that it's the ordinary form of spoken or written language without metrical structure. So metrical structure is basically talking about rhythm. sin ritmo ni nada, así a las secas, as one might say. That's what prose is. Whereas poetry, it's a rhythmical composition, right? Rhythm is an important part of it. Doesn't mean that it has to rhyme, but the way in which it's constructed on the page, that's what makes it poetry. And we'll see kind of an example of that in a little bit here. It's also important that we understand what the other elements are of written language. This includes the noun, which is a person, place, or thing. That's probably the most common way in which people understand nouns. But it's also really important, especially when we get into some of the more advanced techniques, that we understand that nouns are also a state or a quality. It's kind of like a manner of being, right? That's what a noun can be. Verbs are an action, a state, or a relation between two things. This is some basic grammar stuff, but still, good for us to remember, right? Verbs ultimately are actions or the state of being. Adverbs modify verbs, so it's a word that basically gives us an additional sense of understanding about an action or a state of being, as in very of very nice, or much of much more. Then we have the adjective, which is a modifier of nouns and pronouns. It's basically a descriptor. It could be like a color that precedes the noun. It can be the state of being, even. It could be a form of a preposition, right? Prepositions are always used before a noun or pronoun or other substantives. So basically, it gives you the state of being in a spatial or temporal sense between multiple ideas, multiple functions. La preposición, si se dan cuenta, la preposición en español es distinto a la preposición en inglés. There are certain commonalities in our languages between English and Spanish. However, the preposition is one of those things where the actual definition of a preposition is different. So just one thing to keep in mind. But these are going to be the main things that we're going to be looking at today. The more advanced techniques in poetry. These are things that you look for deliberately in poetry, especially as a writer, so that you can create essentially new works of art. Mostly in the vein of the modernists, as we are basically all existing in now. We begin with juxtaposition, right? And this is an important thing because this relates specifically to things like line breaks, caesuras, and enjambment. Juxtaposition is the act or an instance of placing two or more things side by side to compare or contrast, or, as the last part says, create an interesting effect. That is the specific purpose of why we create juxtapositions in poetry, because we want to create interesting effects. We want to actually give people a sense of being startled in a way. We don't want people to just read something and not feel it, not see it in their mind, not be able to picture it. We always want to show in our poetry, in any form of writing, but especially in poetry. Now, one of the ways in which we can create juxtapositions is by using line breaks. And a line break is a very simple sort of a way of understanding, the single line of a poem, right? It's, in very basic terms, the moment within a poem where the line ends, where the line of poetry ends. The caesura is a little bit different. The caesura is a break, especially a sense pause. So you could think of this as maybe like a very deliberate pause between words without the completion of a full sentence. And it's usually near the middle of a verse. So a caesura is oftentimes going to be found kind of in the middle of a line of poetry. The enjambment is an advanced form of a line break. The enjambment, as you can see here, is the running on of a thought from one line, couplet, or stanza to the next. And it's specifically without a syntactical break. That means that the grammar of a line stays complete. If you're writing it in a complete sentence, then it is still a complete sentence. But the enjambment, the specific moment that you break a line and you force your reader to move on to the next line, that is in itself what creates the enjambment. Because in order for your reader to understand the full, sentence in terms of the grammar of it, they have to continue on. But the reason why you would break a line at a very specific moment is because of juxtaposition. Lastly, this is a slightly more advanced topic, something that we'll explore a little bit more in the upcoming weeks, but poetics. Poetics is, as you can see here, a treatise or collection of notes on aesthetics. It's a very, very kind of like academic way of talking about your personal reasons for poetry. That question that I was asking at the very beginning, all of your answers are essentially your individual poetics. It's your reason for writing poetry. It's your reason for constructing the poetry that you do, whether it be because you believe in the freedom of poetry, whether it be because you don't want to follow the rules of prose, or if it's because, every poem that you write, you approach with a sense of emotional vulnerability. Whatever that might be, whatever your reasons for writing poetry, that is your poetics. And when you start to write about your reasons, that's when you write a Ars Poetica, which we'll actually take a look at. So those are the terms that we'll be kind of using for today. Does anyone have any questions here? The word of today's drinking game. Y'all know how much I like Enjambment. All right. So just as a reminder, this handout is also on our Google Classroom, so you can definitely download the handout so you can have the definitions in front of you at any time. Now then, let's take a look at the difference between prose and poetry. Hopefully this looks familiar to you. It is difficult to get the news from poems, yet men die miserably every day for lack of what is found there. So this is the quote that we started off with. And this is it in its actual poetically written form. Before we move on, I think I heard a question. Elena, did you have a question?
Yes. My question my question to you is, how long have you been reading? When did you get your poetry? And how long does it take you to finish it?
Well, let's see. I think I learned how to read when I was in first grade. And I have been writing poetry since I was in high school, like I said earlier, so it's many years. And
then the other thing is, how did you become a writer with poetry with your classmates?
Well, I became a writer, I would say, again, I started writing poetry when I was in high school. And part of the reasons why I started writing poetry was actually because I wanted to be a rapper. So a lot of the poetry that I wrote during my high school years, it was really more like songs. And then over time...
So for the poetry, you should write your personal hygiene about your poetry. The next time you come, you should write your personal hygiene.
Yeah, and that sounds like a good idea, Elena. Thank you for the suggestion.
You're welcome.
Yeah. And I see a hand raised from Jessica. Is that still a question, Jess? Or is that from before? Jess? I think you might be having some audio issues there. Can't quite hear you. Well, in any case, let's go back to our handout and take a look at why it's written the way that it is. So, what are your thoughts, everyone? Como lo pueden ver aquí, tenemos la misma cita de hace ratito, de manera escrita en manera prosa, right? So the first one is prose. The second one is the poetry form. So this is how William Carlos Williams wrote it in his poem. Why, in your estimation, in your analysis, do you think that William Carlos Williams decided to write that single sentence in the way that he did? And remember, we are looking at things like juxtaposition and enjambment specifically. Let's go with Dr. Rosie.
Okay, I'm still learning on this, so, but I want to take a stab at it. Okay, so in prose, it just reads as just words. I mean, you know, and people can pick out whatever, you know, but it just reads as a sentence, words. But when on the second one, what I'm learning is that when it's cut like that, the enjambment, it is difficult. That already stands out for me. Something is difficult. So what is it that's difficult? Whereas in the first one, it just reads straight on. It's a run-on kind of thing. But now I'm learning that with enjambment, when something stands out like it is difficult, it's like now I as a reader, I'm like, okay, so what is going to be difficult? What's the surprise there? So then it's interesting where it says in the fourth line, you know, where it goes every day for lack. Okay, so something is difficult and it lacks. So those are the two, I guess, poetically, it gives it more of meat to this particular poem. For lack of a better word, Luis.
No, yeah, I mean, those are excellent observations for sure.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
Ms. Lois? And you're on mute, by the way.
Okay.
There you go.
I agree, like she said, with the first line. I think Miss Lou said the same thing. It is difficult. So that's making it stand out, and that makes you want to dig into it, you know, and putting the emphasis on. But I would even break it down where it says to get the news, and then the next line would be from poems, and then yet men die. And then next line, miserably every day for lack of what is found there. You know, so just put an emphasis on the word, and with you asking us, that make us look deeper into what the meaning is possibly trying to say, because it could be dying spiritually, mentally, you know, lot of type of deaths. Yeah. So, but I think his reason for doing this is that he, if he say, for instance, he just wrote it and he picked up a paper or listened to your class and he says, let me try it this way, you know, and so he says, I'm going to do this. And so it put a better visual insight on what he said. That's it. That's enough.
Okay. Yeah. Well, yeah, thank you, Ms. Lois. I think that you touched on something interesting about, you know, the impact, right, of seeing it in one particular form over the other. And as Abraham is saying, you know, emphasis definitely is the key here. Dr. Rosie also kind of alluded to that. You know, it is difficult to read that first by itself. It already alerts you, it primes you as a reader in order, you know, to understand that there is something more about to come. And then when you continue on, the way in which the poem itself is constructed, that poetic line, or that poetic sentence, we'll call it, that poetic sentence, it's a little stanza on its own. It ends up being a total of 5 lines. And if you look at each individual line, you'll begin to understand that each individual line is almost functioning like as if it was its own standalone image. It is difficult to get the news from poems, yet men die miserably every day for lack of what is found there. You can use line breaks to sometimes initiate a pause, something in the form of like a caesura, like what we were talking about before. But the most important thing about this particular little, we'll call it stanza, is that the poem, the poetic version of the sentence, it really is meant to give you a moment to pause and reflect on the images that are being presented to you as a reader. A quick little history lesson here. William Carlos Williams was born at the beginning of the 1900s, right? At the beginning of the 20th century. He lived through both World War I and World War II. The modernist poets, the poets that are mostly recognized, as living during that time period, a lot of them were writing in response to the atrocities that they had seen in war. World War I was the very first time that civilians had actually been hurt, essentially, through the act of war. And war crimes were actually committed for the very first time against, the masses. So that particular fact, the fact that the modernist poets all had this experience of watching humanity be its worst, that made them really reflect on why poetry. Why is poetry so important to them? The second effect that had was in that the modernist poets really began to think, especially about images. What is it that an image can do in poetry? So the reasons for a lot of modernist poetry not rhyming is because they prioritized the image over the rhyme. Rhyming is great. Rhyming can be a lot of fun. But if you overuse that particular metrical form, if you overuse rhyming, especially the end rhyme, your poetry can begin to feel kind of more like a song, which, that's great, especially if you want to have people kind of follow you along with the rhythm, but the message starts to get a little bit muddled. The message starts to get just a little bit lost. So the answer to that is imagery, to be an imagist, to be a person that really prioritizes giving people a startled sort of reaction when they're reading something. Because as a poet, you're using juxtaposition. It's rare that you would see somebody write something like flesh red, right? If you see those two words together, you immediately get a particular image in your mind. It's a clever way of using words and combinations of words to get people to become more startled by the images that are coming to their mind. To startle someone doesn't necessarily mean that you're making them feel bad or grossed out or whatever. It just means that you're making them really pause and think about what you are saying. And with that, it's really, a universal sort of concept that came about around that particular time period. The poem that we're going to be looking at, this, for some of you that have been with Conchas y Café for a long time, you'll recognize it. I've used this poem before to talk about the Arte Poetica, the Ars Poetica. Ars Poetica is the name of this particular poem, but an Ars Poetica, this is just like a general term for the poetics of an author. This is a general term for a kind of poem like this one, where it's specifically about poetry and the writer's approach to poetry. And you'll notice something too about the author, Vicente Huidobro. Vicente Huidobro was born on the 10th of January in the year 1893, and he passed away on the 2nd of January in 1948. he was a contemporary of William Carlos Williams. However, because he was Chileno, he was from Chile, he really was coming from a slightly different cultural background that greatly appreciated the concepts of magical realism and a sense of, like, we'll call it imagery, right? A sense of imagery being key to getting people to understand whatever it is that he was writing. He was actually also the founder of a movement called Creacionismo, or creationism. And this isn't specifically in relation to the Bible, although it might be kind of like, Bible adjacent, as we'll see in the poem. But Vicente Huidobro, again, a contemporary of William Carlos Williams, also witnessed all of the same atrocities, if not more, during that time period of his life. And this poem is about his particular views on poetry.
Excuse me, I have a question.
Yes.
So, my question to you is, how long have you died for? What did he do to pass away? Did he faint? Did he not drink enough water?
It was just from old age, I believe.
Okay,
Yeah.
so when he died, does he go to heaven, or does he go to the hospital?
Probably one before the other.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, when he's dead, so that means he couldn't walk, he couldn't read, he couldn't see, or what?
Yeah, all of the above. I mean, unless
thank
if you think about it like in a different way, but yeah, all of the above.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Elena. I also see a hand from Dr. Rosie. Do you have a question, Dr. Rosie?
No, I was just going to comment back on the assignment, the reading material that you provided.
Yes.
That Miss Lois, she made some pretty good statements going back to that. If you put it up on the screen, I don't know if Miss Lois is still there, but giving you some credit, Miss Lois, there, where that particular poem before this one here that you're talking about, just really quick, she even, where she talks about yet men die miserably, boom, and then every day, boom, like dividing all that. It makes sense it would hit me even better that way. I really like the way Miss Lois put it, introduced it, because I'm looking at the Spanish version, and cada dia is all by itself, yet on the English version, it's not. So I thought Miss Lois has a very good point. So I'm just giving Miss Lois some kudos.
Yeah, no, yeah, definitely. And, that's, I think, also an important thing for all of us to understand. The way that a poet writes, that's their individual way, but you have your own voice, right? You have your own method for doing things. And I totally agree with both you and Miss Lois. If this was my line, if this was my poetic sentence, I would have actually have done those same exact line breaks myself. I would have done a line break right here after miserably, and I would have put every day for lack, so that every day and for lack would have been on the same line together.
Yeah.
Because to me, that has a deeper impact.
So as long as a poet, when we're doing this enjammed lines, as long as we can explain why we felt to write it this way, that's what's important, correct?
Yeah, in the end, yes. Because you as a writer are going to know what it is that you want to transmit.
Okay.
When you receive critique from us, when we're giving you notes on how to improve your poetry, you can take that or you can leave it. It's really up to you. It comes down to just, which way is going to be for you personally as the author, the most effective way of communicating whatever it is that you want to communicate. Because in the end,
Okay.
I've said it before a million times, there is no such thing as good poetry or bad poetry. There's only effective poetry or ineffective. So what we're
Okay.
always striving for is to have that effective poetry.
Okay. And one more last thing on this.
Mhm.
Now I've seen, because I was reviewing some on this particular poem, it is difficult to get the news to
Mhm.
is not capitalized, the T, the Y and yet is not capitalized,
Right.
the F and four is not,
Mhm.
and neither is the O and F off.
Mhm.
None of these are capitalized. It's all like one big sentence. Yet in other enjambments, I've seen where the beginning of each word or the letter of each word is yes.
Yeah.
So I mean, what's
There's
how do you explain that, please?
That is a great question, a great observation, and I will say this. There is no right or wrong way to typeset poetry. For some people, it helps to have the very first letter of the line capitalized. For some people, it just happens because that's the way that Microsoft Office is, the way that Abraham is pointing out, But the fact of the matter is that whether you choose to capitalize the first letter of a line of poetry or you choose not to, you really need to just be consistent. So in the examples that I'm showing you here today, one of them, it's consistently not capitalized, whereas the other one it is. Part of the reason why it was like that is because, one, when I found the quote from William Carlos Williams, the one that does not have capitalizations, I found it written in the book like that. So whoever the typographer was that designed the book, that's how they designed it. The
Okay.
the Vicente Huidobro one, on the other hand, that's how I found it. So I'm basically just presenting it to you in the way that it was originally printed.
Okay,
But-
so it's just to their own liking,
Yeah.
but it doesn't have a specific significance like the actual
Well,
enjambment or the a line break or
Mhm.
those kinds of things. Is that what it is?
yeah, that's partly what it is. But I would also sort of give you this like little caveat. It does have a significance in the end. Because
Okay.
again, if you're not consistently doing it, then it's going to signal for your reader that there's a reason why certain words are capitalized and why certain ones aren't.
Okay,
And so
yes.
just, again,
Consistency.
yeah, it's all about consistency. And the same goes with
Okay.
punctuation. Be consistent with punctuation. So, yeah. And
Thank you very much. Yes.
yeah. And yeah, as Mojde actually posted in the chat, that is a good example of how you might use enjambments and formatting to play around with the image, like darkness, covering the ugliness of the darkness. I mean, that's a great little poetic line by itself, for sure. And it's better to use, I'm assuming capitalization, you mean, right, Abraham? It's better to use capitalization at the beginning of a stanza or names and words that you want to emphasize. Yeah, and that's generally a pretty well held opinion. A lot of people kind of approach capitalization that way. So, with that said, do we have a volunteer that would like to read for us Ars Poetica or Arte Poetica, the original Spanish?
I would.
Yeah? All right. So, Elena, how about you read for me the first stanza, what I have highlighted, and then another
Okay.
person can finish the poem.
Okay. May the verse be as a key. May it open 1,000 doors. A leaf falls. Something flies by. May all that is seen be created, and the soul of the listener be left trembling.
Excellent. Thank you, Elena.
Yeah.
And do I have a volunteer to finish us off on the English? Miss Luz, do you want to finish us off on the English?
For Spanish.
Okay. I'll have you read the Spanish one then. Anyone hoping to read Stephanie? All right, go ahead.
Invent new worlds and safeguard your word. The adjective, when not a life giver, kills. We are in the cycle of nerves. The muscle hangs, like a memory, in the museums. In spite of this, we are not any less strong. True vigor resides in the head. Why do you sing the rose, O poets? Make it bloom in the poem. Only for us do all things live under the sun. The poet is a minor god.
Excellent. Thank you, Steph. All right. And Miss Luz, Arte Poética, por favor.
Arte Poética, Vicente Huidobro.
Mhm.
Que el verso sea como una llave, que abra 1000 puertas. Una hoja cae, algo pasa volando. Cuando miren los ojos, creado sea. Y el alma del oyente quede temblando. Inventa mundos nuevos y cuida tu palabra. El adjetivo, cuando no da vida, mata. Estamos en el ciclo de los nervios. El músculo cuelga como recuerdo en los museos. Mas no por eso tenemos menos fuerza. El vigor verdadero reside en la cabeza. ¿Por qué cantáis la rosa, oh poetas? Hacedla florecer en el poema. Solo para nosotros viven todas las cosas bajo el sol. El poeta es un pequeño Dios.
Excellent. Thank you, Miss Luz. Thank you, Elena and
welcome.
Stephanie as well. I'm glad you like it, Bram.
I have a question.
Yes, Elena, what's your question?
So, do you think poetry is easy or medium or hard?
That is a very good question. I think poetry can be hard when you are really trying to express something that is difficult for you to express. But poetry can also become easier the more you practice it. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. What are the first impressions of everyone here? ¿Cómo les parece Arte Poética por Vicente Huidobro? Is there anything that stood out to you? Any image that stood out to you?
Well, for me, because I didn't read all of it. I'm busy trying to write too as I go. Where it says, go back up. Where are you going?
It's right there.
It's right there. It says, not the first line. The first line says, may the verse be as a key. But then I like the second line, may it open 1,000 doors. And then the third line, a leaf falls, something flies by. And so I was thinking about the reason that I write poetry. I started writing poetry when I was, in my early teens. And my boyfriend, who became my husband, he says, you write too much. You let people know what you feel and what you think. And he was all upset because I had some of him in there. But it relieves tension, stress, and it's things that you want to get off your mind that you don't dare say. Peer pressure, what do you call a dysfunctional family environment, and you don't dare tell mama no, that's, oh man, you'd be dead, crippled, blind. So you don't dare express yourself. And so writing is what embellished my life with goodness, with joy, with peace, that inner peace, because I was able to express myself on paper. And so those 3 lines resonate with me.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that those lines in particular resonate with you. I think that they definitely set up the poem in a way that really, especially the first two, they sort of set up the poem in a way where we really are meant to understand the purpose of poetry, at least in the eyes of Vicente Huidobro, right? He's telling you right at the very beginning, may the verse be as a key, may it open 1,000 doors. In other words, may the poem allow you access to 1,000 other worlds that you have yet to see, right?
Well, you had stated that biblically, it could be connected. I think you said earlier,
Mm-hmm.
and that reminds me of the book of that Solomon wrote, and he says, "Out of all you're getting, get an understanding." So no matter all the knowledge you get, I don't care about all those degrees and letters behind your name,
Mm-hmm.
But if you don't have a proper understanding, you're lost.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's, there's a lot of wisdom, I think, in what Vicente Huidobro is trying to portray here, right? Abraham writes in the chat, it speaks of the poetic uniqueness where we were speaking of at the beginning, how one line can be interpreted as many things, and the power that a writer gets with the creation of his or her words. Yeah. Remember, Vicente Huidobro was the founder of a literary movement called creationism. So for him, creation and the sense of creation is a very, very important thing. I see a hand raised from Jessica. Is that a question? Yeah.
Hi, Luis. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so try. So I have a question from the beginning. What I heard you said it twice that this guy Vicente Huidobro was a contemporary of William. I don't understand what that means.
Yeah, William Carlos Williams. So the other poet, the one, yeah, that's the name of the poet that we started off with. So the one that wrote this, that was William Carlos Williams.
Right, I know that much, but when you say this new guy or this other guy is a contemporary of William Carlos, what does that mean? I don't know what that means.
Yeah, it means that they were alive and writing during the same time period.
Okay, so a contemporary means alive and writing at the same time?
Yeah, it's just two people that lived around the same time period.
Okay.
Yeah, granted, Vicente Huidobro was maybe like about 20 years older than William Carlos Williams, but they were still writing.
I like that better because you get generational perspective.
Yeah.
Like I'm 20 years, I could be close to 20 to my kid. We're in the same time, so that makes sense. We have totally different perspectives. Okay, so for this one, what stood out to me, I would almost, for me to get the image, I have to read it backwards, meaning from bottom to top, like where he says, if you go down to the bottom, like I would say, I feel like he's speaking to poets. I think we did something a while, I don't remember what. Anyways, the point is, if this first line, when I put this bottom line at top, that gives me the imagery. The poet is a minor god. Let's say me, you, people are here. The poet is a minor god. And then if you go to the top, I feel like he's saying, remember that, because a verse that you write could be a key that's gonna open thousands of doors to thousands of people, everything that has been created in the soul, the listener, because he's talking about the listener to the poet, let them be left trembling, like make your words powerful. So I had to put that bottom line on top, and then I got this image of like the strength, the power, the influence that poets have in their writing. Especially when it came to the last sentence, just because I like gardening and I love roses, that's my favorite flower. So like when he says, that's the main line that stood out to me. Why do you sing the rose, poets? Make it bloom in the poem. So that's my thing. I had to put that. It's more impactful to me putting the bottom line at the top.
Yeah, well, good observations.
Wow,
and I'm
Jessica,
glad.
I have to say, Jessica, wow, the way you explained it, that's awesome. That's great. I love the way you explained it. Kudos to you, girl.
Thank you. I'm asked backwards all the time, so that's probably why.
No, it's beautiful the way you explained it. I mean, wow. It helped me see the image better.
Yeah, that's what worked for me, honestly.
Yeah, that's cool.
Thank you.
And I think that's one of the fun things about poetry, right? Is that you can remix it in your own mind and you can reinterpret it as
yeah.
you need. Because kind of like what Abraham is saying in the chat, we all hear our contemporaries. We can all, kind of essentially work on the poetry, that we're all exposing ourselves to, so that we get what we're meant to get out of it. That's I think kind of the key lesson there. See, Mojde shares, the key verse may open many doors, but might not open one door of a poem. That's an interesting reflection. I mean, maybe, if your writing is challenging for people, it could definitely, present a problem for some, in terms of being able to access whatever message is meant to be accessed. But that said, what might not work for you might work for someone else. So, that's again, one of the beauties of poetry is that it is subjective. It's a form of art. It's something that every person kind of approaches in their own way. And, the circular nature of this particular poem, I think, is also really important for us to kind of understand. Because what basically the last line says is almost like a reiteration of what the first line said, right? It's kind of like a reminder that, the poet is a minor god, is a reminder that, your verse can open 1,000 doors, the way that, a god can create a new world, right? He outright tells you in this poem, especially if you are meant to be a writer, a poet, invent new worlds and safeguard your word. He gives you not only a commandment, but also a warning. Safeguard your word, meaning like really take care and consider the things that you say. Because as he says here, the adjective, when not a life giver, kills. Sometimes we can be a little wordy as poets. We can say a lot without saying anything. And, this is a good reminder that you have to be very selective of the words that you use in your poetry. Because not only does every capital letter have a significance, every word, every enjambment, every space, we have big spaces here. Every one of these spaces has a specific purpose in the poem. So very much think about, what it is that you are doing with your poetry and why. Why poetry?
So Luis,
Mhm.
Luis, that
Yes.
just go back to that when you said the spaces. If you
Yeah.
go back to the reading,
Sure.
what's your interpretation of that space? Like, why would he create that? Like, why would the space, the way he put invent, he's spaced it, let's say five in that, 5 spaces in, but then 5 spaces more, he just put 2 words, your word.
Yeah.
What does I need to,
So-
or I want to understand, why would you do that? What does it mean?
So spaces in poetry, like the same way that a line break functions in that it gives us sort of a moment of pause, but the way that an enjambment, forces you to continue on. This right here is both an example of a line break and an enjambment, because this is essentially one complete sentence, right? Que el verso sea como una llave que abra 1000 puertas. The complete grammar is found there. Now, when you
Yes.
do a line break or a stanza break, you can also read a line break as a pause. May the verse be as a key. May it open 1,000 doors. When you have it as a stanza break, and the soul of the listener be left trembling, and you have this pause right here, this indentation can act as an additional pause, or it can be used as he's using it. And I'm going to reference the Spanish one better more because this is the way that it was originally written. The reason why it appears like this on our handout is because basically this whole line in the translation did not fit on a single line. In the original Spanish, inventa mundos nuevos y cuida tu palabra is all one single line. This is a typographic technique that typographers use to indicate that a poem has a line that basically doesn't fit on one line space. So, that's why it looks like
Okay.
that. But, the reason for this specific approach right here is probably because Vicente Huidobro wanted that to be set off so that we have, one, a slightly longer pause, two, we have the inclusion of a new sort of like message, right? This transition, it acts as a transition between ideas. The first stanza gives us one idea, the second stanza introduces another idea, and the fact that this right here is left aligned completely with the rest of it, it's probably because this is meant to be read as the same sort of like warnings or commandments that he's giving us here. So that's my
Louis,
assumption.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
Did you get it in the chat that I shared with the group?
Sure, yes, I did.
So what did you think of it?
Well, I haven't had a chance to read it because I'm teaching right now, Elena. So we're kind of focused on this first. Okay?
Okay.
All right. Yeah, it's hard to fit long lines on a single line of the page, as Abraham is indicating. But Miss Lois?
I was going to say because it's indented, it's like I think you said something similar to that, that it's like a headliner, and it's letting you know what comes next, even though the next line was only a one-liner, and then it goes down to another indentation.
Indentation.
Well, and it also explains something else. Would you put it back up and let me do it right quick, and I'll tell you.
Am I on the right
Okay,
spot?
since even though it didn't all fit on one line, it's indented.
Yeah.
Invent new worlds and safeguard your word. And then it talks about the objective, and that means describing something. And when it's not life giver, it kills. So watch your words. And then the next headliner is we are in a cycle of nerves. And then the category comes down. The muscle hangs, and then it's like, so it goes on and gives you the insight of what it's talking about from the headliner or the outline.
Yeah. Ultimately, what it comes down to is he's using space in the visual sense to add emphasis, right? And
emphasis,
yeah. And if we go back up here to our advanced techniques, right? Remember, juxtaposition is one of those things that we're always trying to do in poetry, especially in modern, contemporary, or imagistic poetry. And the reason why we use juxtaposition is, again, to either compare, contrast, or create an interesting effect.
Well, that bottom line, interesting effect, it brings, it like make you focus, make you think. I think someone said, I know Miss Lewis said, that first liner. So that's like a first liner that opens up your eyes, your mind, your expectations.
Yeah. So, there's a lot of things going on in this poem for sure. That are advanced techniques, but there are things that all of you, I think, are already probably doing on your own. The point here now, though, is that we practice it, right? That we put these things into practice. And let's see, what does Abraham say here? And remember, it works because not everything is indented, and the same with capitals, right? So, the consistency of the indentations, it's there, right? It exists. It's there a few times. It's not done just once or twice. It's done at least 4 times. In addition to that, the words at the beginning of the lines themselves, each verse does have capitalized, letters. But not only that, we also have here capital P, poets, and we have capital S, son. Those two very specific points where he's capitalizing the words, it's because he's using those as symbols for something more, right? The sun and the poets are equal in terms of importance in this particular poem. And the poet, capital P, poet, is just a reflection of poets here, right? So there's, again, a sense of significance to that particular use of capitalized words. Ms. Lois?
And like you say, the capital letters make it more important. That means something else.
Mhm.
And I like that statement. Somebody else say, go from the bottom up. Only for us do all of things live under the sun.
Mhm.
That's a big, big, big statement.
Mhm.
Only for us. So to me, he's pointing to the privilege of being a creator of God.
Right.
And the sun is ours to embrace.
Mhm. As is everything else, right?
It's interesting that in Spanish, Dios is capitalized,
Yeah.
but God in English is not.
Yeah, because of the rules of grammar in English, right? This particular use of un pequeño Dios, that is acceptable in Spanish for the word Dios.
Yeah.
But in English, when I translated it, because it's, not the God, capital G God, we are a minor God. Just grammatically, it was appropriate to do a lowercase g.
Interesting. Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah. So there's little things here that when I do the translations, I have to take into consideration. But I do try my best to keep the work, to maintain the integrity of the work, the original work.
Yeah, and it keeps us on our toes. I mean, all of this, we're just trying to nitpick different things so that we can get a better understanding. So thank you.
Yeah. So what I'd like you all to do now is we're going to revisit this right here in particular. And I'd like you all to begin practicing with this particular sentence. And in the chat, write how you would personally approach it in terms of enjambments and line breaks. So you can, type it up into the chat and just share. And I want to see, how you as an individual would rewrite this particular line. And we'll do that for like about, we'll give ourselves maybe 3 minutes. Shouldn't take too long.
We have to type the whole thing?
Just the part that's highlighted, right? So that one sentence, rewrite it how you would approach the line breaks. And like I said, when you're ready, feel free to drop that into the chat.
It's gonna take a minute.
How can you make it go down to the next line without it posting onto the chat? Because if I do that, if I put it is difficult and
just keep pressing the space bar. Jessica, just keep pressing the space bar and it goes all the way to the end. And then when you're ready to type, it goes to the next line.
10-4. Thank you.
Louisa, did you get in the chat already?
Yes. Thank you, Elena.
Yeah. Louisa, can you share with everybody?
Everyone can see it in the chat, Elena, so you're good. For those of you that are maybe having trouble with the spacing, you can also use the slash.
I am.
Right? The little diagonal is as it's called in Spanish, the slash mark, as a tool for indicating line breaks. So you can do that as well. I like how Abraham gave us some spacing in between words too. Nice. Practicing caesura there, Abraham. Yeah. So,
You moved it.
oh, question there, Miss Lois?
I'm slow. I still need the writing.
Oh,
The
okay.
poem. I'll try to speed up, but I need it.
No worries. All right. So while that's happening though, so I want to take a moment now to read to you all the different interpretations that each one of you presented. And I'm going to use the line breaks, by the way, as a pause. So we're going to listen to how that sounds. This one comes from David Fallon. It is difficult to get the news from poems, yet men die miserably every day for lack of what is found there. And this one comes from Roots. It is difficult to get the news from poems, yet men die miserably every day for lack of what is found there. This one comes from Abraham. It is difficult to get the news from poems, yet men die miserably every day for lack of what is found there. And then this one comes from Heidi. It is difficult to get the news from poems, yet men die miserably every day for lack of what is found there. This one comes from Mojde. It is difficult to get the news from poems, yet men die miserably every day for lack of what is found there. This one comes from Stephanie. It's difficult to get the news from poems, yet men die every day miserably for lack of what is found there. Here's another one from David. It's difficult to get the news from poems, yet men die every day miserably for lack of what is found there. And this one comes from Jessica. It is difficult to get the news from poems, yet men die miserably every day for lack of what is found there. Here's another one from Mojde. It is difficult to get the news from poems, yet men die miserably every day for lack of what is found there. I've got one from Miss Luz. It is difficult to get the news from poems, yet men die miserably every day for lack of what is found there. And then Miss Lois, it is difficult to get the news from poems, yet men die miserably every day for lack of what is found there. And then Dr. Rosie, it is difficult to get the news from poems, yet men die every day for lack of what is found there. So I'm not sure if you were all able to hear the subtle differences, but there were subtle differences in each approach to the line breaks. You know, some of them had a little bit more emphasis on pauses. Some of them had a little bit more emphasis on slightly shorter lines. But I think all of them still managed to get the same general essence of what is important in each line. So congratulations, everyone. I think y'all remixed Dr. William Carlos Williams' work very well.
Louisa, did I try my best?
Yes, thank you, Elena.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I hope that you all kind of got a good sense of how to approach a line break, how to approach an enjambment. Again, this handout in particular is right now already available for you to download from the Google class. But your homework assignment for this week is going to be to write your own Ars Poetica, kind of taking cues from what Vicente Huidobro did here. Your assignment is to essentially write a poem that answers this very question: why poetry? And of course, the challenge is to really consider the things that we talked about, right? Consider juxtaposition, consider your line breaks and enjambment, and really think about why poetry, right? What is it about poetry that, just does it for you? Why are you in this class? Why are you writing? Why are you hoping to communicate whatever it is that you want to communicate? Why poetry? So, does anyone have any questions for this week? Is it pretty clear?
My question is, how long do we have to write the poem?
As long as it takes.
So, do you want me to write my poem now or next week?
Well, again, just as a reminder for everyone, if you do complete the homework assignment, right? If you complete the writing prompt of answering the question, why poetry, through a poem, you should be sharing it with your group, with your cohort, before the end of Friday. So that way your cohort can have the weekend and Monday to read and prepare notes for you. So it would be due on Friday.
So the poem that I wrote is today. I will be discussing about personal hygiene, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Elena. Yes, Miss Lois?
I have a situation.
Mm-hmm.
I only have Miss Stephanie and Miss Dr. Sister
Rosie?
Rosie.
Yeah, we got each other. We got each other.
I lost my other contact email numbers, names. I don't know what happened. I'm so confused.
That's okay. So
Discombobulated.
when I upload this video to YouTube and I re-upload the assignment tomorrow, I'll attach the list of names of all the people in your cohort. And then if you have any difficulty finding the emails from the last email that I sent you with everyone's email address who is in your cohort, then just send it to me and I will try to forward it to everyone.
I don't mind. I enjoy sending, but
Okay.
I don't know what happened. I'm so confused.
Okay. Well, either way, I'll follow up with you individually then, Miss Lois, so we can figure that out.
Okay.
Yeah. So.
Oh my goodness gracious.
All right.
Abraham didn't say too much tonight. We love you, Abraham.
All right. It looks like y'all worked out what you needed to work out in the chat there. Heidi, question?
Yeah. You mean today their home?
Oh. Sounds like your connection cut off. Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna say goodnight if there's nothing else.
Yeah.
And as you were speaking, Brother Lewis, I was saying, man, he is so informed. You are a well-educated man, boy. You go back to I'm saying boy because I'm 79 years old, but no disrespect. But you research, you have all that information. I mean, this is a great class. I wish I could just tell everybody to come and just listen in, if nothing else. Oh man, you got it going on.
Well, thank you, Miss Lois. Thank you.
I'm serious.
If in case you do feel so compelled to share, the videos are up on YouTube, just like this one will be too. So you can always share the YouTube video with your friends who might be interested. So
yeah, my friends are 80.
Either way.
They, you know what? They don't. Oh man, they old. They are old.
All right. Well, that will do it for tonight, though. So So thank you, Miss Lois. I appreciate the encouragement. Take care, everyone. Have a great week. We'll
Oh,
see
you
y'all
guys
soon.
have a blessed weekend.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
See
Good
you
night,
next
all.
week. Bye.
Bye.
Night, everyone.